is Mark Gibson, and I'm head of the Outreach and Innovation Program in Teagasc. And some of you might know me through a webinar that I run on a Friday morning. It's become quite popular amongst the agri-food sector. It's called the Signpost Series. Runs from 9:30 to 10:30 every Friday morning. And if you haven't found or haven't come across it and you're interested in sustainable agriculture, it's definitely one to tune into, because it's one we live stream. It's also recorded, and all of the presentations are available on the Teagasc website. So that's my plug for Teagasc over with. But I want to introduce our excellent panel, and we're going to be discussing architecture. And a really interesting collaboration here between the Irish Architectural Foundation and Creative Ireland. And I'm delighted to introduce you to our panel in Bernardine Carroll on my far right. We then have Shauna O'Neill, who is from Cloontuskert in County Roscommon. And Shauna is the head of the Tidy Towns company or development company in Cloontuskert, and is one of the projects that's part of this project. And then we have Emer Savage from Global Action Ireland, and Emer is Global Action is one of the partners in this project. And finally, we have Caelan Bristow, who is an architect and is working with the communities involved. So I'm going to ask Bernardine, maybe if you could set the scene for us a little bit and to give us a sense of what this project is about, because this is about a very innovative architect. Frank Gibney was the architect of many villages and developments across Ireland back in the middle of the last century. And I think if he was here today, I think he'd be pretty impressed with the city that has popped up around us over the last few days, and probably wouldn't have believed what is possible now with the marquees and so forth. So Bernardine, this is a project that is very much looking to address the just transition of Ireland moving away from fossil-based fuels. And people are probably wondering, what is the connection between architecture and fossil-based fuels? But tell us.
Well, actually, important that the Irish Architecture Foundation considers climate change, because I think, is it 40% of carbon comes from the construction industry? So, I mean, a lot of architects are very concerned about their own role in the world. You know, what are they contributing? What's the pro-social role of architects during a time of climate crisis? So it's quite right that I was actually, I guess, really considering projects that connect with climate action stories around the time that the call for the Creative Climate Action Fund came available. So anyway, so the Irish Architecture Foundation, we are interested in promoting and celebrating architecture and our built environment. So architect isn't just for people who have, you know, Mac mansions in the countryside, or who own a castle down the country somewhere. As soon as you wake up in the morning, you're affected by the decision of an architect somewhere. You know, that architecture is about how you experience the world around you, about your relationship with the world. It's not just houses, it's groups of houses, it's your office, it's the streets you walk down, it's how you experience place. And so we really want to support Ireland in celebrating and understanding this. A few years ago, we were really lucky to get funding from Creative Ireland to start a pilot project called Reimagine, and that's the program I run. Reimagine is a type of community architecture program. It's about connecting architects with communities so they can consider and address something in their built environment that they want to address. So it could be a problem, but not all problems are problems. Some problems are just more design problems, things you want to creatively think about. And so we've been doing that for the last few years, thanks to Creative Ireland. And then towards the end of that program of support, this fund came up. I'm from a rural area myself. I'm from Westmeath. I come from a farming background, and my aunt lived in one of the Móna villages. I grew up hearing about them in Kildare and how they were a very interesting model of housing. You know, before I heard of housing estates in rural Ireland, we knew about these groups of housing. I knew the ones in Rocher Bridge that we'd pass on my way to my granny's house. You know, I knew about these housing forms And at the same time, as I was thinking about this rural form of urbanism, what urban development means in a rural context, we had an open call for communities to take part in our programme. And thankfully, Shauna applied. And Shauna just happened to be from one of Frank Gibney's housing communities. So essentially, Frank Gibney in the 1950s was recruited by the government to plan and deliver housing for the workers of Bord na Móna. It was an interesting, I guess, project, and an interesting person to take on that project. So not only to house a lot of people, but what Gibney took on was essentially creating communities from scratch, and in some places in brownfield sites or greenfield sites where there was nothing there before. So that's in Caldove and Kildare, and places like Cloontuskert, where Shauna lives. There would have been maybe a school or the faint hint on the maps of where there might have been a village in the past, but there was a graveyard. And other places that were connected or in the centre of other towns like Rochford Bridge. So there were very interesting houses. And Gibney himself, I love a good biography, but like, this man was unreal. He drew all of the plans himself. These are the houses that you might recognize going around the Midlands or in Ballinasloe or lots of different places, because they were, he designed a lot of one-off housing, social housing, early council housing as well. But he also had an idea for a new country that we wanted somewhere north of Athlone. He did a map for that. He had whole ideas of how cities should be laid out. He had some kind of weird ideas about knocking down medieval sections. So he was just a fascinating person to look at. But he also prototyped what we can consider probably one of Ireland's earliest sustainable houses, which is the clay house that he built. You can see these houses now in places like Clough-Jordan, rammed earth-style housing. When we couldn't import bricks into Ireland anymore during the emergency, he was digging up foundations and using the earth that he dug up to make bricks to build a house that was twice the size of the council housing at the time. So we tested this out in Castlecomer, and it actually was really successful. Unfortunately, he got distracted back into building houses, so we continued on. But even within the Bord na Móna villages, they are really considered examples of sustainable design. We'll leave that to Caelan to explain. But anyway, that's a massive whirlwind tour of Frank Gibney and why we were obsessed with him and delighted to be working on this project.
Yeah, no, it really sounds like he was ahead of his time and really innovative in his approach. Let's get back to I suppose, the issue that's faced by Cloontuskert. Bord na Móna were forced to cease harvesting peat, and this has had a huge impact on the wider economy. Maybe Shauna, you could talk us through that impact and where you are in that journey of reimagining where Cloontuskert is going.
So I think, just to come back to the title of the project itself, Reimagine Workers Villages. So it's about people at the heart of reimagining our future. It's about creativity, it's about climate action, all that goes along with that. But to just go back to the early 1950s, Cloontuskert was first developed in 1952. But previously, there had been a village settlement just across the road from the greenfield site that Bord na Móna would have acquired in the early 1950s to develop the village on. So when we eventually were selected for the Reimagine Cloontuskert project, the submission that came in from Evelyn Darcy and David Jemison as the architects we decided to work with on the project, with the support of Creative Ireland, Irish Architecture Foundation, Global Action Plan. On the very cover page was an old ancient map of Cloontuskert and the village settlement that was there, linked to the cemetery, former monastery that was in place. It had vanished. People in Cloontuskert don't realise it was there once upon a time, but the question was, do we want to allow our village to disappear once again? Do we want to lose our tradition, connection to the landscape? So even though we had been selected for the project with very real reasons and drive, I suppose, to bring people into the heart of creating their own future, reimagining their future, that really spurred us on as well to further question gravity of the situation we find ourselves in. Just a bit of background about myself, I suppose. I'm chairperson of Cloontuskert Tidy Towns, but the reason I'm in Cloontuskert is because both of my grandparents, or grandfathers, I should say, worked for Bord na Móna back in the early 50s. One side is from just down the road, locally in Roscommon, and on the other side, they came up from Wexford. So in 1956, my granny actually did the interview for my granddad because he was at work labouring with the local farmer, and she got the job for him. And a few weeks later, they got the letter in the post as part of the recruitment drive for Bord na Móna workers to come and live in these villages all around Ireland, all their stuff. And they got on a train, came down via Dublin back to Roscommon, and ever since they've been there. So to come back to the heart of the kind of issue, I suppose, is climate change. We could no longer harvest peat on our boglands. It's out of the question, of course, but the way in which that was approached was not fair to the people. It was pretty much a shutdown in the space of a few days of local peat harvesting, which we relied on going back to the early 1950s. The reason which our village came to exist and the reason which the community came to be there shut down overnight with no plan in place for the future. So that's the crux of where we're at with the project.
So the huge impact on the identity, the security, I suppose, of everybody. We look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, it was really affecting that basic need for to sustain a living. And I think we heard a speaker earlier on today saying that he woke up one morning and it was gone. And he was just really concerned about the future for the next generation, as to the state job, or and that's a lot of seasonal employment as well from the Bord na Móna, and a lot of people would come back to the area during the summer months and so on. But that's gone, or there's a risk of that may not continue. Emer, can you tell us why what inspired Global Action to get involved in this project?
Well, Global Action Plan work a lot with communities. Primarily, we've done a lot of work with communities in Ballymun and the regeneration of Ballymun with the 1990s. And so a huge part of our work is kind of around education and community work. So opening dialogue with communities and working together to collaborate on action plans and focusing on the areas that people want to work on to create a more sustainable reality for themselves and their communities. So it was a great opportunity to collaborate with the IAF on this creative project. Since we've met the communities, it's just been an extremely enlightening experience for everyone concerned. Just to really, it's a message that needs to be learned across the nation and beyond. I think that the impact that some of these climate action policies have had on real people and communities. And I think there's a kind of an assumption, like we're an environmental organization, hopefully not the Mickey Mouse ones that we talked about earlier on, but there's an assumption that climate action is necessarily a good thing always. And obviously if it's done well, it is. And obviously, as Shauna has said a second ago, we can't continue to we can't harvest peat. It's not a sustainable solution, but there's ways of doing things and involving communities and having that social dialogue and justice at the heart of all of the processes that we are going to have to follow through now. It's just really important.
There's a great phrase or saying, I'm not sure who came up with it, I always think it's a good one. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. And I think it's really appropriate in this conversation, because without having that multi-actor engagement, you're not going to bring people with you, and it's not going to be sustained progress either. Caelan, if I could turn to you, you're the architect working on the program. Frank Gibney's architecture inspired the thinking now.
Yes, of course. I mean, Frank Gibney was inspirational before his time. I think any architect would, in Ireland anyway, would know his work. The different developments across the country are, you know, they were inspired or theoretically inspired by garden city design, which was a kind of turn of the century idea about focusing on garden as you know, designing around the idea of the garden, and his architecture or his design ideas were quite traditional at the same time and possibly inspired by modernism. And he, at the end of, at the basis of everything was the human scale and the inhabitant. So most of his detailing, you can really get a sense of the person, the actual human being that lived in these developments. He did apparently design something like 6,000 and possibly built 6,000 dwellings across the country. And so we are more familiar with the ones that are in these housing developments for Bord na Móna. He was commissioned by Bord na Móna to do these. Yeah, so I think that for anybody who sees them, I recognize them all across the Midlands anyway. I live in rural Ireland, but in a very different kind of community in Tipperary. But my partner comes from Birr, so I've been very aware of Kilcormac and some of the other housing developments in areas near where peat extraction was taking place. Yeah.
So we have a great team here coming from all different aspects, and I think, Shauna, I think you appreciate that. And from hearing you earlier on, I think would it be fair to say that you're quite positive about the future of Cloontuskert, but needing the correct resources and support to make this grand plan happen. The grand plan mightn't be quite there yet, but I think you have a good sense of what's needed.
So as part of our work with the project, there have been some fascinating ideas that have come in from the community, and it's opened up a conversation or discussion in our community that is an emotional one to have for people. It's a tough one, given that it's so tied to not only employment-based history or heritage, but also family. That if your father, grandfather worked for the company and that's your identity in your community, your association with friends and community, it's very, very tough. But I really think, given the sustainable design principles architecturally that are embedded in all of the schemes already, it's a model for future sustainable development in terms of Irish architectural design. Even though it is a Bord na Móna community, Bord na Móna Workers Village, inherently, why can't we be part of the next phase of the energy transition rather than our past links to brown tradition in terms of energy independence in terms of the formation of our state, but transition to the green in the future?
And given what you said earlier on, you were saying that, look, the just transition hasn't kicked in Cloontuskert. I mean, what are the lessons that can be learned there, that this delay? Because I was listening to the radio this morning and they were talking about justice delayed is justice denied, and it nearly applies in this situation. I mean, there are deadlines, are very ambitious targets for climate action in this country, and we have to move very quickly on them. But from your perspective, you know, what should be happening?
Just to come back to the transition, I think it's such an idealistic concept. Of course, it's well founded and whatnot. It's been done well in other areas internationally, but if we come back and just take a step back from it all, and this just doesn't apply to Bord na Móna villages, agriculture, etc., that we strip back the layers and look at the multifaceted nature of it all. But really, I think the main thing is for this project that we've opened up a conversation in our community that hasn't been had, that probably should have been had, in terms of looking at what a just transition looks like for the communities affected. There's a huge amount of anger locally in our community and other Bord na Móna communities that relied so heavily on employment of Bord na Móna and the ESB, and rightly so. If your job went overnight with no forward planning, no forward thinking, it's a very, very hard one to take. But essentially, in terms of the positive look forwards that we have, we already have the model there. We think it's for those supports to be put into place. Like if we're looking at energy retrofitting, that the likes of the Móna villages are looked at for specifically how that can be done, and an objective lens taken on it all with the right experts.
Of course, it's yeah. There's going to be a lot of policy support needed for that. Bernardine, from your perspective, what do you see as the next steps for this project, and ultimately, what can we learn, or what can other projects learn from the work that's taken place so far?
So, I mean, a lot of our Reimagine projects, we try and almost be a generator or an incubator or an early stage thing that we can set up communities to proceed onto a more ambitious or a more impactful fund or project. So some of our projects have gone on to get URDF funding, or to get, like things like that communities would normally have the scope and capacity to generate an idea of that scale or that impact. So we're, when we work with the communities, we are thinking of maybe how we are connecting together ideas. So, and I mean, initially we thought we'd go in and do maybe 5-month project, have a nice little document or a little report or a nice little project at the end and be done. I think we maybe underestimated just how important what we were doing was, that we thought we support communities to learn more about Frank Gibney. They can use that in their tourism plan. It can be a lovely creative process, maybe even make a nice film that they can show at, when they're applying for funding. But actually what we discovered was a really important national story that wasn't really being represented, and maybe was at risk of being lost. And we work really slowly. I work really slowly in general. I tend to go really deep and try and mine a little bit what's going on in the communities, and maybe have the very difficult conversations that other disciplines can't have. I think that creative practices have the capacity to listen and be nimble enough to have to listen and be there with communities that don't normally fit into our traditional consultation engagement processes, that are not going to turn up to a big town hall meeting because there's no town hall, or not going to engage in an online webinar because they don't have the digital access that other communities have. So that's where we place ourselves. We're having the hard conversations with harder to reach communities. So I should have known this would happen, but that because we were going to unearth something that wasn't just about local communities or small things. It was something national. And I don't think it's malicious what's happening. I actually don't think so. I think what's happening is that there's a greater good that needs to be addressed here, which is how do we use our bogs as carbon sinks, because they're our best opportunity right now to try and make big wins. But, and all big projects, there's people who are going to be handling the fallout. The people who are handling the fallout right now are those who have the least opportunities and the least voice in the process. They're the people, they're doubly impacted. That's a kind of a just transition idea as well, that there's communities that they're doubly impacted. So people who worked for Móna weren't in Dublin getting well-paid jobs, having and being close to power. They're in remote areas, in remote communities, with more distance from decision-making power, with lower paid jobs, lower education, because education wasn't required for you to get a good job in Móna. And it just meant that the communities, this happens across the world, that are affected by decarbonisation processes from coal mines to peat mines, are usually people who are less likely to be at the decision-making table and generally take the most burden. They're the ones who are experiencing job losses.
What can we learn from those other projects? And everyone feel free to chip in on this one.
What can we learn? It's maybe to remember to have a justice lens when we're looking at projects like this. It's great to have a good win we have no choice here around the decisions we need to make in terms of climate action, but we also need to look at where our red lines are. All projects have red lines. It might be economic. We mightn't want to make people homeless, or we mightn't want to totally cut off power to everyone's house. There is always red lines, But clearly there's some communities whose livelihoods, whose identity weren't considered a red line, who were the fallout of a decision. And so that's it. That's when you look at it from the margins, essentially, look at the communities who are in between the big towns. You know, we're living in rural communities. You don't normally have to say, how are they impacted? And so if we put them at the center of the project, so we put the workers intentionally in the title, put them at the center of this, what is their experience? And suddenly you see something alarming and something that doesn't need to happen, but also they're not lying down. There's fight there. There's ideas. You know, the guys in Kilcormac, they, as workers, they came up with the idea for Loch Bora, this amazing place that everyone should visit. It's fantastic. Yeah. You know, in Kilcormac, you've got fantastic projects happening there that every community should be trying to replicate.
That early engagement is so important, Emer, isn't it? To have that voice and to have it centered around the people that ultimately are affected. Because I mean, there's a real risk of this happening again in other aspects of society.
Yeah, we're looking at farmers now. You know,
farmers are another one sector, but you know, the engagement side. How did that work on this particular project, Emer?
Well, I mean, I think from the word go, we had some really fabulous community reps that we were working with. So Shauna has just been a powerhouse of just super ideas and just really just like very, very passionate about her community, and had like created an eco village in Cloontuskert with her community, but really leading it every step of the way. Things like permaculture garden. She has a nuttery. There's a tiny forest. There's so much there. There's a real this huge drive, and that's as Bernardine has said. And that was when we met the community in Kilcormac as well. Just people who are not giving up is not something that is an option. It's really very dedicated.
Yes. There's a steely determination there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's quite troubling to think that the social dialogue and that engagement and that social piece, so important, hasn't been done well. Because there's definitely, if you pick up the phone call Cloontuskert, there's somebody very, very much eager to make their place a better place and move forward to the green future. They're ready to talk. So it is, yeah, I think it'd be a very easy step from the other side. From the ground up, it seems to be very difficult to get through to that higher echelons, however.
I know from my own community development company, and one of the challenges is getting people involved, or because oftentimes it tends to be a small few that are the kind of doing the heavy lifting. And Shauna, I see your head nodding there. I mean, is there? I know there's no magic solution to that one, but I mean, how can we get that greater engagement going with people? And maybe Caelan, you'd like to come in on that one.
I just want to say that I noticed that in Kilcormac, and the crew that I meet every time I go down, I think it's 3 people out of quite a large community, and they said no one ever comes to the meetings, no one ever comes to any organized event that they have do with what to do about their community. So I suggested that maybe, even though they don't know me, I'd set up a little stand at the Saturday market, and everybody wanted to talk to me. It was hilarious. I had maybe 15 people come and tell me their stories about living in Cormac, in the Gibney estate, working for Bord na Móna, their connection between Kilcormac and the bog, and their fathers and mothers, and their fathers and mothers, and being children there. There are so many stories to tell. And the sad thing is that when Bord na Móna ceased production, they kind of turned off any connection to this past, this social history. That's what we're trying to celebrate, hopefully in all of our projects, but particularly in our Kilcormac project. It's about the architecture, but it's actually about the people who have grown up around that architecture.
Yeah, that one-to-one contact, I think, is so important. So even lifting the phone to individuals and Do you find that, Shauna, or have you cracked that one yet?
Unfortunately not. When we do, we'll report back. But just to mirror what, or kind of come in on what Caelan said there, it's most interesting that individually the residents will chat for so long, hours really. The pride is there, full of ideas, but that engagement piece is really tough. It's definitely not a typical case whatsoever, but it's most interesting that it's the same experience in Kilcormac as Cloontuskert.
I don't think that they're aware that people want to hear the story, or they're becoming more aware. But I think they feel like they can't really tell the story because who's going to listen and who cares? And I think now we're recognizing that this is such a national story. There's so much for people to listen to. And I think anybody in this country, when they start hearing what these people have to say, it's fascinating. And there should be a national story being told. Yeah.
I just think on that as well, that people are so beaten down in our communities that there really is that, why would I bother? Who cares? Sentiment about it all. But I think that we're starting to kind of crack that a little bit and open up the conversation, and it really is leading to creative climate action, because in our community, as Emer said, we have a number of projects on the go, and we've got more people involved in those through community education pieces around permaculture and community gardening as well.
And yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, there's one thing giving people a voice, but you have to have the ears as well to be listening to the voice. So it's important to cultivate that as well at the highest level, like John Joe was saying earlier on. Bernardine, one of the real positives I see from this project is connecting communities, you know, with similar issues. I mean, you know, that to me, I know it seems like a simple outcome, but I'm sure that has given Shauna and her fellow project participants, you know, a huge sense of, you know, we're not the only ones experiencing this, and I'm sure this is the case with other.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could probably just set up a whole project based on bus tours and then to do quite well, because it's, you know, a lot of times people don't get a chance just to go and look and see. And looking and seeing isn't just about getting ideas. It's actually about validating what you're feeling and what you're thinking yourself, and thinking, I'm not the only mad one in my community who keeps saying, do you know what we should do? And because that's who we usually end up working across our projects, is the group of people. And you have that, if you look back historically, like there's always one person who said we should paint every town in the village a different color and that'll be good for tourism. Like those are ideas going back decades that, you know, really took off. That was just one person thinking, do you know what we should do? And unfortunately, that person can sometimes drown a little bit in the negativity and the kind of the fear of looking silly, maybe, that other people have. And so to be able to connect those people up is great. Be able to connect them with the skills they need is great. So like our approach isn't necessarily to go in and say, this is what you should do. It's to really try and find the right skills and resources for that person. And so, and if that means getting on a bus and going a few counties over to look at exactly the same village that you grew up in, but in a different county, then that's great. And we also, I mean, it was quite an emotional day, I found, when we did bring the two communities together. So I make light of it, but actually it was quite intense. There's a lot of trauma in the communities. There's a lot of hurt. The anger is understandable, but for a lot of people, they're living in a narrative that tells them that they're being unreasonable to be angry, that they should accept things and move on. So it's really nice to be able to create a space where that, I guess, that can be validated, that you were right, this is real. You aren't just the only one in your village, in your community, in your county that's going through this, that there is other people, but actually look what they've done here, or maybe there's something you can work together on, you know, because it might be really, really hard to, let's say, come up with a plan for how to use a bit of the peatlands around your village alone, but maybe working together with another village, you can come up with something constructive. So that's kind of nice. From the very beginning, I'm looking at the film footage. I just need to mention that we had a filmmaker from the very beginning, Padraig Cunningham. He's an artist from Roscommon, embedded in the project. And the idea is to try and, like, I guess I kind of know, I mean, nobody wants a bunch of strangers rocking up into outside their house and staring at it. Like, it's not going to go down well, you know, but at least if we have people from the beginning that people get familiar with over the course of a year, they'll be like, oh, you know, here's Evelyn back in her blue car. You know, that there is that sense of, and you said that from the very beginning, there's going to be people who might be not in the room, but who might be outside the room looking in. And after a few visits, they might want to come in. You know, that's a process in socially engaged art that's used for, and all anyone who works in that contest knows the value of having a little bit of a spectacle that draws people in. You know, maybe 2 days later they might lock up something online, and that's totally fine as well, you know. So, but anyway, yeah, it's I just wanted to mention Padraig because he's been doing fantastic work. We have his film is on show for, it's half an hour down in our little exhibition, and we'll be showcasing that again. But that should go back to the community as well to revalidate that, to see, God, I wasn't the only one sharing that story about, you know, the excitement of having running water and decent accommodation, and to know that I have security of tenure.
And hopefully in 50 years' time, we're looking back at this recording and looking at an amazing project in Cloontuskert. Shauna, if I were to ask you a challenging question now, let's say you took over from Micheál Martin now. You were in charge.
For about 3 years.
What would you do? What would you like to see happen if you had a magic wand that you could really get things moving? Because let's face it, like we have to move beyond the talking phase now and look at action and really you know, getting change happening.
Absolutely. And I think in our community, this conversation has been had time and time again, residents speaking about what they want to see happen, what the issues are. But come and speak to us. That's the first thing. The people who live there themselves are living through the transition. Listen to those people and learn from them. There's so much talk, you know, in the media about our communities with glaringly obvious mistakes in how our communities function and how people live within our communities. And that's insulting, really, because it's so easy to come and have that conversation. As we've discovered, people at length will speak once they're given the respectful way in. That would be the first thing. Come and speak to the people face to face. Online consultation only works for a very small subset. It's not very socially engaged, it's not very inclusive, and it's not accessible either. Cloontuskert has an aging population, and straight away that's not a runner. But also
particular to Cloontuskert either.
Yeah, absolutely. Outside of Cloontuskert, it's a well-rounded issue. But outside of that, really, there have been so many ideas generated as part of this project. Time and time again, they're now actually, you can see in the backdrop of that image that that's the inside of the old National School building at the very heart of our village. It's at the very centre. Unfortunately, there was no forward planning, which seems to be the recurrent theme here, led to the roof collapsing on the building. A huge ownership issue, which we worked for many years to resolve. Thankfully, we now know that the OPW owns the building, and we're able to kind of look to the future. Without an owner, can't do much really. But that was allowed to happen. So it's kind of a visual for, you know, crumbling away when the right people aren't engaged and the right protections aren't put in place. So really, in the future, we'd like to see something done with that building, that it's not allowed to decay away. It's such a central part of the architecture of Cloontuskert, and that an architectural, you know, protection be put in place there. But likewise, with Evelyn and David, the architects, we're so lucky to have worked with over the past year. They've very much obliged me at different stages where an opportunity might come up at Roscommon County Council or other organisations to sit in on Zoom sessions, one in particular being in relation to a proposed greenway in the Cloontuskert area, connecting up with other areas in Roscommon. But one of the suggestions there is rip out the old railway lines. You know, that's something we don't want to see. Once they go, you can go and do that walk anywhere in terms of a greenway. What makes it special is the industrial heritage and those features that are so unique to our landscape and our association with the surrounding boglands.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly. You have to be so careful, and that's your unique selling point is how, you know, all of this industrial heritage around, and to try and exploit that. But the sense I get is that there is there's an openness to big ideas here, and that's you want to talk to the right people, and this is part of the process. So hopefully that next stage is really having that conversation up in Dublin, wherever that might be. I'm sure there's plenty of people. We're in the right place here anyway. We're in the heart of government here at the Ploughing Championships. We're going to wrap things up. Would anybody else have any final comments they'd like to make before we wrap up? Any burning comments you'd like to make? Bernardine?
I think, I mean, this project was, it finishes at the end of the year, but we really want to continue it. We have these postcards, and on the back, there's a link, a QR code that links to a Facebook group. That's for people who have an interest or a connection to the Borden and Móna villages, because we found that the connection between the communities, that sense of allegiance and affinity, can lead to potential action that can be quite impactful. Like we think that the communities have an opportunity to be quite ambitious here. And again, it's not for us to say you should do this or you should do that, but we can lend our expertise towards looking at things to do with the structural, the architectural and the spatial environment. And we've particular interest in protecting and celebrating the industrial heritage, the industrial heritage story, because that's a human story. That's about the workers. It's not just about the machines that are now rotting or sinking in the bog or being sold off for scrap. Be protected there, but we also need to protect the story of the workers, and how we can continue on that culture. But yes, that's a group that we want to connect. Hopefully, this will allow us to maybe approach some nice government departments who may have money to try and continue this project, because hopefully it is something that can be a change for good. You know, that we're trying not to get too nostalgic, too caught in reifying something that can't come back. We're very realistic about this, and the communities are as well. But maybe collectively and together, there can be something that's ambitious and beautiful that we can create. We want to see the ambition of the original Borden and Móna. We want to see the ambition of the original Frank Gibney villages. They were so important for Ireland's national heritage, for how our rural communities developed. They prevented out-migration. They developed communities that were going to disappear. And right now we have islands of communities that are wondering, what is our story now? And it doesn't have to be caught in the past. It can be something really hopeful for the future, and maintains a connection with the bogs and the landscape that goes back thousands of years before Borden and Móna even existed.
Okay, thank you very much, Bernardine, for wrapping things up for us. Personally, I just want to say it has been fascinating for me to research this project and to learn about Cloontuskert and Kilcormac and all of the different other projects. Really, really fantastic project. This Reimagine program funded by Creative Ireland, and I want to say thank you to Creative Ireland team for inviting me to be involved in this project. I'm certainly going to keep a close eye on Cloontuskert and others, and hopefully there's potential there for involvement by ourselves in Teagasc, perhaps more on the agricultural side. Shauna, you wanted to say something?
I just want to say thanks so much to Bernardine for all the work she's done as well. Just amazing, really. This entire project has reignited something in our community, something new, and links back to our history to look at our future. And to Tanya as well for supporting the project through Creative Ireland, and to Emer and the whole team as well at Global Action Plan. And it's just fantastic to get to know so many new people, make so many new friends, and that together we can create something really special. I think that hopefully will create our sustainable future.
I couldn't think of a better way than that to finish the session. So please give a round of applause for all our panelists. Thank you very much for staying with us, and hope you get home safely. The traffic probably is eased now at this stage, so probably no harm hanging around. Okay, thanks everybody.